Thank you all again for joining. Appreciate your time. I want to make good use of it. So what I wanted to do is spend just a few minutes going through Conceal, our product sets, and kind of what we do from a solution perspective, and then we'll get right into the panel. Let me go ahead and share my screen and make sure everyone can see it online. All right, just checking. Can you guys see it online? Can I get a check?
Hey, Jeff, can you try not speaking into the vocal mic and see if you can just speak loud? Yeah. Let's just see if we can kill the reverb.
Yeah. It's about the same. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Can I get a thumb up?
No. I think online, but in here it isn't. Yeah.
Okay, I got a thumb up. Thank you.
They're seeing this.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Yep. All right, thank you guys so much. So we'll go through real quick. Conceal is about a 10-year-old company. You may not have heard of us because for the first 10 years of our existence, we began in the intelligence community. We were formed by a former member of the CIA who created our solution to help the intelligence agencies work through solutioning to do kind of their black hat ops and whatnot, and be able to get out and do their job without being able to be attributed back to them. We have a strong leadership board. Among those are former NSA Director Admiral Mike Rogers, and we have David DeWalt, who many of you may know from his experience with FireEye and McAfee. At the core of a Conceal is our network layer. It's a software-defined network that's very unique in the industry. We effectively have a network layer which prevents the tracing of information from source to destination. We use a combination of publicly available commercial and physical POPs that we rotate regularly through a process to make sure that we can avoid anyone doing tracing in terms of routes and that type of thing. So as you can see here, we essentially will rotate network infrastructure. We do that through a variety of different entities, so we can conceal not only the network piece but the building as well, and make sure that we can provide pure anonymity for any kind of network traffic that goes on through the environment. We use that to service on 3 different core products on top of that today. Our search product is used by intelligence agencies and a variety of law enforcement and now commercial entities to allow them to go on the internet anonymously and do threat research, intelligence gathering, and other activities which they can do in a completely concealed bubble. Basically, it's a remote browser session, and they can take on a persona that they cache from anywhere in the world. So that permits them to look like they're coming from anywhere to be able to do any of the work that they need to do online in a completely safe and, again, a non-attributable fashion. Our cloud infrastructure is our ability to take cloud infrastructure that we will procure on behalf of a client and then hide it behind our network. So we can provide you space to do any kind of cloud services, application, storage, and make sure that there's no way to trace it back to your organization, either from a network perspective, from a building perspective, commercially. It doesn't look like it belongs to you. And we have a lot of use cases for that in terms of hiding high-value information, secure backups that are out of band, those types of things. And any application or storage solution that you could imagine can go into the Conceal Cloud environment. And then finally, our Conceal Browse product is a new product that's coming to market here around Q4. And that's a product to take our Zero Trust browsing infrastructure that we've used for search all these years and take it to an end-user solution. So we're going to provide end users the ability to safely browse, and when they go click on links that they're getting through email or any other place on the browser, our browse engine will intelligently decide whether it's safe to pass through or if it's risky, and then dynamically throw that into an isolated bubble using our Conceal Cloud infrastructure to provide the bandwidth and the network for that. In terms of our architecture and some of the use cases there, essentially we can use our network to form a point-to-point connection from end users to the internet, from end users into a Concealed Cloud environment. We also leverage our infrastructure to provide point-to-point connections from customers from data centers to cloud environments, cloud to cloud. Really, it's essentially a highly secure software-defined network that we can leverage for a variety of use cases and maintain no traceability from source to destination. Typically, our customers are using this to, again, hide and obfuscate what they're doing on the internet. So we have a very high vetting process to make sure the customers that we bring into our corporation are trustworthy. We don't let anyone just purchase our services. We have to make sure that we go through a process to make sure it's a legitimate company with legitimate interest. We do have a lot of government law enforcement agencies, so a lot of our network security components are managed by those teams. All of those folks have security clearances, so it's a highly secure environment that we monitor and maintain very dynamically. We allow you to also procure not only cloud infrastructure, but any other network infrastructure you might need for your organization through segregate entities and other organizations that we can use to procure things you might need that you don't want attributed back to you. We have corporations, for instance, that will use us for break glass network infrastructure for communications purposes, so that if your internal environment gets hacked, we can have an entire environment standing up in silo from that, totally detached from your network, to allow you to have a place for your network security folks to kind of regroup and discuss how they're going to react and reform to get control of the network again. We have a lot of customers in the financial services industry, and this is a high use case for us today in terms of doing not just threat hunting, but also corporate research and mergers and acquisition type scenarios. The newest product we're bringing to market, we're very excited about here in Q4 as well, is our Conceal SR. This is going to take the ability of our network to get direct access to Tor networks in the dark web, combine that with some very dynamic analytic search engines to allow us to provide our customer a ongoing intelligence as a service, looking in their organization and anything that might have been compromised and discussions about them, information about them offered on the dark web, that we can provide as a portfolio and a regular report to them. So you can imagine if you have credentials that have been compromised and for sale on the dark web, that's something that our service will identify and be able to report back to you as a corporation proactively without you having to manually go through that. We can provide those services from a geographic perspective, so we can tell you when certain activities are happening geographically close to offices or specific suppliers of yours. And we can identify a wide range of services that would be detrimental to the organization, even into the fact of components like intelligence that's being shared, information, intellectual properties that have been compromised or being shared across the dark web. So that is an overview, a quick overview of the Conceal infrastructure and offerings. We'll be here to talk to you guys and would appreciate any conversations we can have with you down the road. The last thing I'll do is do a quick demonstration of our Conceal search product. Give me a second. Here on the screen here, I've got a cross-section of one of our demo environments just for demonstration purposes. And I'll be showing you how we leverage our network to change your network identity and allow you to safely get on the internet. Everyone can see? Okay. For this environment here, we're ingressing the network here on the left-hand side. So this would be a customer data center or an end user who's ingressing. We're jumping onto a cloud environment. This one happens to be in Google in Virginia, and we're changing your identity to a non-routable 10 IP address. We then drop you to a second POP. This one happens to be AWS in Ohio in this instance, changing the network identity a second time. Then we hop you to California, where we change the network identity a third time before we can pop you out anywhere on the internet or back into a Conceal cloud environment. So we're essentially changing that network identity several times, so even men in the middle have no idea where the traffic's coming from, where it's going to, and if you're doing work on the internet, there's no way to get back to find your core organization and where you're actually coming from. I'll go ahead and launch the search product. And when we go into the environment the first time and log in, it's going to prompt me to choose an egress region. So these are our POPs located all over the world. I can choose any of these to cast as my network identity. We also have egress regions directly on Tor, so you can go in without having to install onion browsers and doing fancy things, get right on there and surf directly into dark web sites for research, effectively preventing you from having to maintain that infrastructure yourself. The inventors of Tor actually use us as customers of ours because they can get on the Tor networks easier than they can with their own browsers and such. So I will pick Central Canada, spin up a connection, and you'll see this green box that appears inside the solution. Now, what I've done is connected to a virtual machine running on our cloud services. I've egressed through a central Canadian node, and everything in this green box is a remote browser isolation session. I'm not actually running the web code locally. I'm just looking at a picture of a website running on a virtual machine. So anything that I go to inside this green box is happening in a bubble-wrapped web session. It's a one-time use burner browser session. As soon as I close this tab, anything that happens in this green box goes away, so it's totally non-attributable, and it's safe to do anything you might have to do in this session in terms of researching, checking out potential malware links that folks are getting emailed in your organization. All those things can be done safely inside the green box. And again, once you close it, it all goes away. Technically, you can see up here, we're taking the link and embedding them inside of the actual wrapper. So it's an embedded link, which allows you to easily and quickly just bookmark sites and use them, sites you go to frequently, right back into the remote browsing session. See here, this site thinks I'm in Ontario, Canada, because I picked the central Canadian egress region. And anything I do in here will look like it's coming from that region itself. We have malware checkers built in as well, so if you do click on malicious links, it will try to scan them first before it passes them down through to your own laptop or computer to do its additional security processing. And again, we have the ability to take these sessions, bubble wrap them, and cast them as coming from anywhere on the network that you may need to. It's a very rapid, very quick service. We are able to dynamically spin up infrastructure as we need to. It's one of the unique pieces of our technology. Since we're leveraging cloud POPs, we can simply spin them up and down anytime we need to. It allows us to be much more dynamic in terms of the infrastructure we invest in. We don't have to buy a bunch of stuff and have it sitting around all the time. We can just spin infrastructure up and down, deterministically route across those POPs as we need to, and provide really good service. We're typically within 200 milliseconds or so of for network latency. So we've done video conferencing. You can watch YouTube over this. It's a very fast, rapid solution. So for any of you who are interested, we can give trial licenses to those of you who are here. Please see us afterwards, and you can get hold of us online, and we can work through getting trial licenses for any of you who want to try out the search product. I think it provides a dynamic solution for us in the security space, again, to be able to quickly do the types of research we need to without having to go build and maintain a bunch of infrastructure. All right. Thank you all for that. Now, give us a second. We will transition to the panel. The question is for companies who are thinking about building red team and purple team type organizations internally. What are the steps, kind of the process that you would go through to start building those groups internally and getting them spun up?
Yeah, so the number one thing that I always try to focus on when I get that question from one of our clients is generally try to figure out what you know you have internally. Like, what inventory do you have? What vulnerabilities do you know exist? What are your low-hanging fruit is what we usually call it. Yeah. So other than that, I would probably divert to Ryan on the rest of that. So.
Yeah.
I think for a big part, it is about building a maturity model where you can look at kind of the layers of things that you need. So for instance, if you don't know what's on your network, then vulnerability scanning doesn't necessarily help you because you don't know what you need to be vulnerability scanning. So building some sort of inventory of at least your networks. Once you've got that, coming up with a vulnerability management program where you can actually make sure that things are scanning. But with vulnerability management, a lot of people think is, okay, so I've got this product that scans my stuff. But vulnerability management is also about how you deal with those. So just because you know you have 4,000 vulnerabilities on your network doesn't necessarily help you at all until you have a way to assign those out to the stakeholders and remediate them. And so kind of like Alex was talking about, knowing what you have on your network, who owns it, helps you assign those out. Once you've kind of got that, looking at what your high value targets are, and then looking at concentrated penetrated tests against those is helpful, so that you can figure out for a lot of folks call them crown jewels, what you have and whether or not that important in secure. And then from there, you kind of drill that out into a more general red team that's looking for these gaps. So, you've got controls on your network. You're doing vulnerability scanning. What strategically are we missing so that we can build out that program better so that you can have a more robust security program as a whole? And so that kind of, maturity level helps. Also, as you start looking at, what do we care about? Looking at things like threat intelligence. And a lot of organizations, threat intelligence is, I've got this feed of, IOCs and IOAs from all of these tools, but, threat intelligence really is, relevant, timely, and actionable. So unless you know what's relevant to your organization, and unless you have a way to make that actionable, intelligence really isn't that great. So figuring out how to build out that program where you do know what you have, that kind of inventory, and then figuring out how to turn those things into something actionable is important. So for instance, if you know that you have IOCs everywhere, indicators of compromise, but you don't know how to look for them, does that really help you? And if you know that, for instance, maybe China is attacking manufacturing, if you don't know how to take that information and use it in your organization, does that really help you? And so the red team and the threat intelligence should be going together to build out that program. That was a lot, sorry.
That was good. The only thing I would add to that is make sure that you're tied up with your change management team. It's as part of that vulnerability. So as we're talking about change management, you could be trying to identify your assets, and if there's not a good change management process, you're just dumping more garbage. I'm getting a lot of nods. You're just dumping more onto the network. So as you're going through this, make sure your change management process is fortified, understood, and that's tied into your vulnerability management plan, because they can typically be, unfortunately, disparate teams. I've seen that within organizations, maybe a few hands that they're separate teams when we talk about when it comes to change management. So that's the only thing I would add to that.
Peter, anything to add?
Only to echo what Ryan knowing yourself, knowing your company, knowing your operations, and knowing how your system fit into it far too often. I've gotten into situations where I go into a pen test and they say, okay, tell us what we have. Don't be that organization. Don't rely on me or the pen test organization to find out what you have. Have an inventory. Have a change control process so you know what's running and what's been decommed and what's about to be decommed, because it's almost out of date. And also with the change management process, I guess the problem that if you don't have coordination between that and patch management, then you're going to have a situation where you apply a patch that we've all had it happen. It breaks the operating system, and then you have a production outage because you didn't properly coordinate. Okay, yeah, you have a more secure system to draw, but that isn't really going to be helpful. So, and also to, again, emphasize what Ryan said, you have a lot of information. A lot of information is coming at you, a lot of information that you can go out and get. Trick is to take action. If you have all the data and you're not doing anything with it, it's like having, again, a lot of organizations have a disaster recovery plan that is very thorough and gets stuck in the sales and kind of stuff. It's the same thing here. You have a bunch of information. You gather dust once you do something.
Thank you. That's a great point. I think that one of the themes there is take responsibility first. Don't make the red team a crutch that you're relying on to do your job for you, in a sense, right? Take that responsibility, have that information handy, and do that homework beforehand. So when they're coming in, you've already kind of done as much of the maturity of that as you can beforehand, right? Absolutely. Make most use of that. Yeah. When you're looking at trying to identify who is good for roles as red teamers, trying to staff a team up or train folks or internally, I know there's a process that you have to go through to make sure that you find the right types of people. What are you looking for in terms of skill sets, in terms of kind of the mindset, and what makes a good red teamer different from someone that's more focused on the defensive side? Ryan, we'll start with you.
I think that's a great question. I think that there's one kind of, we'll call it funny, I guess. But basically, when people ask me what hacking is, it's really malicious system administration. So if you're a good systems administration person and you have the curiosity to around becoming a hacker and willing to like do research, then you're going to do great at it because it requires a strong understanding of systems, networks, applications, all of those things that systems administrators are good at. So when I look at what somebody has when they are wanting to become a hacker, I look at how curious are they? Are they curious enough to ask about something? Are they curious enough to research it? Are they curious enough to try it out? You know, where does that kind of fit in? There's tons of academics out there that will do research all day but are scared to actually put some of that into practice. And those folks typically don't make great hackers, although they can do great research because I think that actually getting out there, trying it, figuring out what the limits of something are, and then how to bring it back once you have made it so bad that it no longer functions is kind of a key part to hacking, figure out what those boundaries are. But the same is true for good defense. You know, understanding how different things can break, how the different pieces fit together. And so really it's where's your passion, what do you want to be researching, and how far are you willing to go with it? And the same types of people can do great at both. So for the people who are interested in getting into hacking, one of the things that I have found most common is they're not willing to go all the way with the research. They're afraid to try things. They're afraid to you know, do a bunch of Googling and then like get to an answer and then see whether or not that behaves the way that they think it does. So a lot of the things that I look at are, you know, how curious is somebody and whether or not they have done any research to any kind of focus on their own. One of the best interviews that I had for an entry-level hacker, they actually told me about hacking the car wash to get extra change back when they wash their car leak. And so that kind of mindset where somebody messed with something until they got to a point where they got their desired outcome is the same kind of mentality that will work online as long as you're willing to mess around with this stuff.
Great. Peter, any thoughts?
Well, I'm going to bring up a kind of a weird analogy, but maybe some of the people in the audience are young enough to get it. I'm actually way older than I should be to use this analogy, but anyway. If you've seen the TV series Dexter's Lab, and the character in there named Lee, Dexter's sister, and her most common catchphrase is, "Ooh, what does this button do?" And that, I think, to me personifies the sense of curiosity that Brian was talking about. You have very complex systems with a lot of features and a lot of things that you can do, and you have to be willing to not only explore them, but say, okay, well, I'm going to do what the person who designed this didn't expect. I'm going to enter some information in this format, or I'm going to fill out this field, or I'm going to go to this link, or I'm going to go to the source code, and I'm going to find that in the hidden link that they have our code in there, and I'm going to go to them. So that type of exploratory mindset and say, hey, this is interesting, I wonder how it works. And Googling it and reading up on it and then just going and abusing the system. Now, I am not in any way, shape, or form recommending that anybody do this to production systems or systems that you don't know or systems that you do not have specific written authority to play with. But there are lots of places, try Hack.me, there's lots of sites and things that you can practice on. And that type of research you can have, you can even set up a personal machine in your own house and use things like that as portable. Try and figure out how systems work and what they're doing and how you can make them do what they want to do.
Another piece with that, Peter, is, you know, Azure and GCP, AWS all have free versions where you can spin up your own machines, try your own things in the cloud, and you don't even need anything at home. So those are great for instance, if you want to set up your own domain and see how creating a Windows domain works. Those sort of things are great for that. And so with all of the resources available to us, just saying, well, I can't because I don't have the things to do that really isn't as big of an excuse as it was years ago, which is also kind of neat.
That's great. Thank you. And Alex, I know from a services perspective, people who are good at this are kind of your trade. So walk me through kind of the things you're looking for as you're trying to look for talent in this space.
Yeah, so the number one thing I know of is I've never met a hacker that wasn't stubborn. So every single hacker I've met has always had something about them that they had to, get it right or figure it out. And that's, I guess, what builds that quality. So when we're looking for people that we're going to hire in our space, we generally look for that. We look for someone who can get a little bit of information and just continue to run with it. So if I tell you about Kerber roasting or something like that, you might come back to me and tell me about AS rep roasting, which is very similar but also different from the context of what we were discussing. That's something that's important to the hacker culture in the client scale, where we're working in a very quick and fast-paced nature. So that's some of the factors. Others, some people look at certifications, some people look at degrees. It can matter, but it can also just show that they have structure. And so as long as you have some certifications that show that you were able to finish courses, that will help, like a Security Plus, things like that. It doesn't have to be the OSAP. It doesn't have to be the CISSP. Nobody says it has to be a specific certification. Just whatever teaches you, really. So that's what we look for.
I think I would just add from our organization is if you were picking someone to play basketball on your team, you could get somebody who's from North Carolina. He's got a certification in basketball, right? Really good, passed all the certs, did all the drills, or you could get Michael Jordan. Which one do you want? So when we're talking about hackers, I really want to zero on a couple of things that was said. Our organization has been focused and very fortunate to have folks like Alex, Ryan, Heather, Peter, that we host a ton of training, and it's always free. These rooms should be packed full of folks that are stubborn, that have the resources, because there's no barrier here. Everybody's welcome. And Elijah over there is one of our youngest members. I'm always going to point him out. A lot of good futures. So I would say if you are interested in this, do more to reach out to us to see what skill sets that you lack. Maybe you just need a push from Alex. I mean, he yells at me all the time. I'm just kidding. He doesn't. He's very supportive. If you have something that's confusing, we have a whole community of people here that would help you. So I would say when you're hiring someone, make sure they have desire. There's a lot of people changing jobs right now because they're just barely putting the effort in. They show up. They put their clothes on and they stand in front of their computer. It's not where it is right now. We've got adversaries coming at us like we have never seen before. We have the Russia-Ukraine war. I'll stop on this point. That's why we exist. We're here to train. We're here for education. So that is the big driver when it comes when I'm talking to somebody who says, hey, I want to be a hacker. I'm like, really? Here's a project for you. Just see if they finish it. I will tell you, it's only about 30% of the people that will actually do it.
No, thank you for that. And I think also it's a good point too that I think these skill sets and that type of curiosity is key for folks who are on the defensive side too. It's you're going to be better at the defense if you're also playing a little bit on the offensive side, and if you're putting yourself in that mindset, right? The best defenders are folks that have that kind of a little bit of a attacker's mindset and are thinking through things from that perspective. So that's really good perspective. Thank you guys. Turning a little bit more technical for a second, Conceal's background is more on the network side and trying to conceal activities and those types of things. In terms of just the tactics of doing some of the penetration testing and whatnot, what's the advantage of being able to use network technologies to obscure where you're at and provide that layer of anonymity? And are there specific sites, systems you go to where it matters kind of where you're coming from, and that plays a role in terms of the activities themselves? Ryan?
Sure, I'm going to hit that from two sides. First, from an attacker standpoint, and then from a defender standpoint. And so, one of the things that we see as red team is frequently, when folks realize where you're coming from, suddenly networks may behave differently. So being able to look at things from different vantage points is particularly helpful because you have the ability to, if you feel like you're being navigated from one location, switch to another location and see if you're still getting the same result. And so if you're seeing some sort of automated or manual, mitigation that some systems are putting up, being able to switch is very handy. From a defensive standpoint, one of the things that we see is that attackers are aware of the tools that defenders use. And so being able to mix up some of those things so that they're coming from different places gives you a better chance of being able to see what the actual malicious site that someone got phished from looks like, or something along those lines. Because as soon as you put it into one of these automated tools, those are already blocked. So being able to use something like this where you can come out from anywhere is handy. And if you look at it from 3 different locales and it's 3 different websites with the same URL, that may tell you that there's something up. Also, when you're looking at your own website, when I was doing incident response, one of the things that we saw is that when we looked at things from our own company, the website looked fine, and when we looked at it from somewhere else, it had a completely different website that was completely compromised. And so being able to switch that perspective, even from a defensive kind of standpoint, is really, really helpful.
Great, thank you for that. Any thoughts, Alex? And you guys do that type of work in your activities with customers?
More from an offensive perspective, we would more or less use things for kind of like an internal tour for us. So we could go out and do vulnerability scans through that network, and that would help us with evasive assessments where the client wants us to be evasive without using potentially compromised nodes. We would know that they were secure through Conceal, but also anonymous, and they wouldn't be coming explicitly from something that we control. So, and then the alternative to that would be like a C2 network or a command and control. So have that routed through redirectors for more advanced configurations. So that's 2 of the primary things that I could see that running through. Yep.
You may want to explain what like a redirector is and the C2 framework and kind of how that works, Alex, so that folks can understand kind of like what the redirector is and why it would make sense to bounce through a couple hops.
Yeah, absolutely. So a C2, for those who are who don't know, is a command and control server. It is the primary server that is handling any web or any shell that comes back, any payload that is coming back to the central, the C2 server from the victim. So when you execute the payload, it'll stay on the C2 server and you can interact with it, similar to Cobalt Strike's team server or a Metasploit Meterpreter team server. You would put a redirector in front of that in order to mask the C2's server's IP address. That would help you maintain your campaign without burning the actual backend server in case you had to change things in the front. It allows you to keep a lot of your shells that you may have in other places as part of your current assessment in case one spot of your like one domain gets burned. And so you would have, say for instance, example.com as the quote redirector server, and a blue teamer could browse to that and it would look like a normal website, but if you give it a certain set of data, it would redirect that traffic back into your C2 network and execute the command or give you the data back that you were requesting from your victim's device. So I think I went way too far with that, but here you go.
A big reason that we do that, though, is because the actual server itself is very difficult to configure and requires a lot of feeding. You also want to make sure it's secure so that somebody doesn't directly attack your backend infrastructure. So by standing up these front-end servers in a place like Conceal or cross various cloud providers, all of those sort of things, the attackers don't know what they need to attack if they're trying to, for instance, take you offline. Instead, they have these front-end web servers which are lightweight, but are very difficult to actually impact your back-end services. So from a security standpoint, we have to still think about those things even as attackers in protecting our infrastructure. And those sort of things help us both maintain operational security as well as protect our own infrastructure.
Great, thank you. And I was wondering, Peter, if you had any thoughts on both the offensive and defensive side of that equation in terms of the network obfuscation.
Well, so on the offensive side, one of the things that you have to deal with in any penetration test is time. A lot of penetration tests are really compressed because the device doesn't want to be there that long. And so what a persistent threat actor will do is that we really can't simulate in a short penetration test is that they will poke here and see the system react, shut them down, and then wait a little while. And then they'll poke over here and wait a little while. So if you have something that is effectively hiding the origin of your attack, then it can't really shut you down, and you don't have to wait. You go, okay, well, I will poke over here from this location, and then poke over here from that location, and be able to do a lot more attacking in a shorter amount of time. So there's an operational efficiency there. Now, from the defender standpoint, you have to echoing what Brian said, is something where as trying to make sure that the attacker really can't see or can't immediately determine what the surface area is to attack. I think you have a tagline that they can't attack what they can see. And so being able to say, okay, well, I have my back-end server over here, but I have these front-end steps that need to get to first, makes it more difficult for an attacker to do their job.
Great, thank you for that. Anything to add?
I would just say the quieter you become, the more you can hear. So if it turns into, I know it's Cali tagline, so every nerd should know that. It just turns into a cat and mouse game. If you can mask yourself, you're not gonna play cat and mouse with them, because once they figure you out, then you don't have as much surface area to go after. Once they figure you out, they realize you're there, and then it's a cat and mouse game, and you're not going to get as much out of that pen test than you would otherwise.
It's interesting to look at the tooling and some of the skill sets and getting folks involved for this. That all requires money. It requires resources. And I was curious how you would recommend organizations go forward in just getting the backing, the budget for trying to build this capability, and maintain it thereafter. What are the best ways to go about that, and instead of just waiting for things to blow up, which is the kind of the de facto way most of us get budget in the security space.
I can take that one. All right. So for me, I'm not about selling FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But if you're going to get your C-level executive involved, you need to educate them. How many of you would say your C-level executives don't really see the ground? They don't see the ground troops. I see a lot of people nodding because generally they don't. They get very emotional. They see Log4j, their head falls off, and then everything else becomes, no problem. This is the forest fire. Don't pay attention to the rest of the planet on fire. It's okay. So the first part of this is education. Some of the things that we've talked about that I wanted to mention is there's some real teeth to compliance issues. So what happens when you're in Europe and you happen to lose somebody's information? What does that bill look like? So when you start paying attention to people actually getting fined, I've seen some of the largest fines because I read some of the breach reports, $9.4 million. That's a chunk of change now. Now, if you've seen it over the past 15 years as I have, that's starting to get a lot more attention. So I'm going to center around making sure that your C-level executives come to training. They come to training that's specific to them to say, why do we need a pen test? Why do we need these technologies? But I will tell you, if you're not in the know right now, you're dead. If you do not have a threat analytics center or a threat intelligence center that you're taking good, knowledgeable feeds from, you're already dead. So that would be the first piece of it. The last part is to make sure that you're communicating from your pen test to different levels. So you're speaking to the system administrators and security people in one brief, getting them knowledgeable on what's going on, helping them with their processes, get some smart people like Ryan, Peter, Alex, and others here to sit down with them and improve those processes, then brief your C-level executives on the why part. We know the how, we just can't get them to release the money when it comes to that. So we could look at some of the damages that they could incur. You know, certainly we could think about businesses that have gone out because of that. Secondly, make sure they're very well educated. You have to get them out. And that onus is not just mine, by the way, it's yours. So if you have C-level executives that you want particular education, let us know. We're forming that. So I would start there.
Peter, any thoughts on getting that support at the executive level and making sure we have the budget and resources to kind of work through this?
Sorry, I wanted to unmute the mic and I turned off my camera. So, yeah, going to the executives, again, like Executive Rob said, but there are certain details, is not going to, even though your executives are operating like different emotions, that is not going to be your success. Getting the support is understanding, depending on understanding what's important to them and then to that. So in this case, understand what business operations they have, understanding the flow of information and the flow of products or services or how that works, and then what would happen if a threat actor has to compromise that process, or has to compromise that service, or has to compromise that product, which even though we haven't seen that much, I can see that coming in the future, especially with the escape threat actors. And then saying, okay, well, here is something where another company had this situation, and again, this like Ron said, this is the type of fine that they got, this is the type of punishment that they experienced from the government or done by the private sector. And that is something that you need to, again, speak to them on their level, say, okay, well, you want to make sure that your business, you want to make sure that your profits are good and that your factories are open and that your people are working. Here's how a information security breach is stopped that. And I think that's a really bad idea for everybody involved.
Yeah, good insight. Thank you so much. Ryan, have you had been able to have success helping to work through these kind of budget resourcing issues, and what are some of the best practices you've come up with over time?
And I think that one of the interesting pieces about this is that as Rob said, security is an emotion, and so it's about how people feel. So unless you are building stories that hit people, I don't want to say in the heart, but close to home, it's hard to get traction for a lot of things. So the first thing you need to understand is what matters to the business. If you don't understand what matters to the business, then you have a hard time telling a story that matters. And without that story, you're going to have a hard time getting the budget for the things that you want. And so one of the things that is nice about PenTest is they can actually be used to get defenders what they need. I think most defense organizations have a concept of what they need, and they need justification to get it, because a lot of folks see the defense organization as a cost sink. And so people don't put more than they need to in there. And so unless someone can demonstrate that need in a meaningful way, it's sometimes hard to get that budget. So one of the things that I would say is, step one, understand what's important. Step two, understand what the gaps are that you need to highlight. And then step three, build a convincing story about how that gap will lead to the loss of something that group cares about. As the program matures and moves out of just the, hey, here's what we need to be okay. Good testers and good red teams can help really change the way that an organization does business. Can help identify gaps in not just technology, which is what a lot of people think that pen testing is, but also in people and processes. You know, do you have a whole set of people that are willing to cook any fish that you send in? And then what's the implication of that? You're looking at adopting new technologies. These are people that understand if they've been working for you for a while, you know, how your organization works, and can help you understand how this transition has the ability to impact your overall you know, sort of attack landscape. And so this attack surface that's changing, you know, these sort of red teamers or pen testers have the ability to help you, you know, look at those things before the attackers on the internet do. But it all starts with being able to build a story that somebody cares about. Because without that story, you have a hard time getting people to just spend money, or to understand why a gap in controls is such a big deal. One of the things that I've heard a lot is, it doesn't feel that bad, so like, why do we need to invest in it? So, okay, well, let's make it feel bad, and then you'll feel okay about spending that money. And so building those stories is I think, one of the most critical pieces of good pen testing and good writing.
No, that's a great answer. Thank you. Alex, I know that you have customers that they're putting their trust in you to go through and kind of help them work through these processes, not just at a point, but kind of from a more of a solution, an ongoing perspective. What are your thoughts on in terms of what the best cadences are in terms of frequency and how the coordination between red and blue teams should work? When should they work together? When should they work separately? Kind of the best, best get the most out of your program.
So I've worked on both sides, blue and red team, and the best way that I've seen to be able to do it is always work together regardless, but make it competitive to a certain point. Like, that's the best way I've always done it, and I know some people don't necessarily agree with that, but when you say competitive, you say more or less of, okay, well, we've been able to move around the internal network this way. Okay, cool. We're going to catch you this way, and that helps build that, relationship with both teams, but it also allows you to act faster in the case of an actual incident as well, because there are instances where red teamers can help in blue team incident response. Another thing that I've heard of, I've actually not been a part of, is rotating red teams and blue teams. So every so often, just rotate the role of the user from red team to blue team in the organization. That's one thing that has apparently had some fairly good success, so that you're able to see it from both sides. So, but other than that, yeah, when you have a third party come in, such as myself, use us. Like, we're here to help. I constantly want to help any client who comes in if they have a problem that they're having, trouble getting into something patched or what have you, like Ryan and Peter were saying. We can focus that in a report. So, that's generally what I would say.
Peter, any thoughts on the red team, blue team dynamic and how they can best work together?
Again, as Ryan said, it's kind of a conflict between them, and yet a competition as well, because you want to challenge them in order to hone their capabilities on both sides, and yet at the same time you don't want to make them enemies, because they're they hacked and traced in 1986. Remember when it's all over out there and all over. So I think that having them work with each other, maybe even train each other. Let's have a once and learn or a training session with the blue team from the red team. Things that we're exploring, and from the red team. And the blue team will train the red team as to, okay, well, here's what we're looking for in that discussion as to how we can make that work effective. And also just having a discussion as to the inventory and where things are and the processing, how sensors are supposed to communicate. Because I think that's one of the things that, especially on the blue team side, you have to emphasize is, okay, what is normal versus what is abnormal? And a lot of the time, because you're going to get a lot of noise in normal operation, you want to say, okay, what is specifically going to be the normal operation of the company, and what does it look like when somebody's trying to do something wrong, and practice on that, practice trying to find that, have the red team do something, and actually try to practice with them to see, again, home capabilities on both sides.
Great, thank you for that. And I really liked, Alex, your point about kind of that friendly, competitive type thing. I know one of our customers I was talking to a couple of weeks back, their red and blue teams, they game against each other for beer money. They actually have a beer pool. That's where the money goes. And as they were the red team was trying to get our product to help make themselves a little more competitive. And I asked, is this for make your organization better or for more beer money? And they said it was not mutually exclusive. That was a joint goal. So I think it's a really good insight is to make that something that they can work together, right, for common goals, but do so in a way that that kind of sharpens the skills of all sides. So in terms of kind of next steps, in terms of how folks can take where they're at today, I think a lot of organizations have focused a lot on the defensive side. The offensive side is something that if they have put any focus on it at all is either nascent or something that they just buy pen testing tools from and check a box from that perspective. What are the next steps in terms of moving forward and kind of getting into that groove of being a little bit more dynamic and aggressive in how they're pursuing that?
How many of you have tools that you work with that you probably know 20% of its capabilities? Be honest. Raise a hands. There should be way more hands than that, but okay. All right. So my point is that we have a lot of tools that you've been begging for several years back. You got the money. You got some training. You watch the videos. And you're not using it very effectively. So I'm looking at all of you because you won't raise your hands. Don't worry, your boss isn't here. It's okay. You're not using it very effectively. So for me, how do you move forward in the world that we live in? You need to constantly look at the new tools. I wouldn't call them toys. I would call them tools. We have an adversary that we've never seen before. Russia-Ukraine war has brought about a lot of adversaries that we haven't seen before. Insider threat has brought a lot of adversaries. We have new people at jobs. Some people are not happy. There's a lot of intellectual property that's being moved around. So the first step for me is to take inventory of your tools. Don't just say, hey, the blinky light is blinky. We got 4 blinky lights, we're okay. The boss, everything's okay. And then you breached. Because at that point, go ahead and sharpen your resume. You're out of there anyway. Let me use an example. How many people do you think kept their job as security folks when their companies got breached? Right, they were gone. And then let's say as an example, if you decided, hey, I'm going to hire this person, and their resume comes up, and you're like, oh, so you were on the company that just got breached. Yeah, thanks for coming in with your resume. Have a good day, right? You need to look at your tools. The other part is I have a different vantage point. I've looked at Conceal. I've looked at the technology. We've had a discussion about it. But here's the thing. We're going to need you guys to come in and have more discussions. So the first step is to look at the tool, look at how it can be used, and then the last part is evangelize that. If you have tools that you're not using, you need to rip that stuff out of there. Take a look at it and see how this can be used. Now, is it going to be perfect? Of course, it isn't going to be perfect. But if you have anonymity where you're coming from and where you're coming out of, that's a big advantage when you're doing a pen test or you're doing research or you have to go somewhere. So consider this as an opportunity. And then the last part, I'll finish on this, education. Bring your boss to this. Get this recording, go back to him and say, hey, we got a free license. Kick the tires on it, and here's a thought. Give some feedback. If you like the tool, great. If there's some things that need to be improved, I'm sure everyone back in that back row that's got their hands up would say, hey, do you have a use case? Where's our blind spots? They can learn from us.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, and I'll just close out my comments by saying that, after 10 years of heavy use in the defense agencies and intelligence agencies, a lot of questions we get asked a lot is, why are you now selling this to commercial entities as a new thing? And the short answer is that the those intelligence and defense agencies have asked us to, because the fact is that threat actors, state actors aren't just going against state actors anymore. We're all at risk from that, and so you have to have that kind of high-level, nation-state level mindset and defensive set of tools and processes and procedures to be able to protect yourself, because that's where the threat's coming from today. So I think it's a really good point that you made there, Rob. Any other questions or?
So we have questions. So if you have a question, Miss Jackie's going to write it down. So Dale, get it to Miss Jackie. Do we have anything online that you see in the chat, gentlemen? No.
Hey, Rob, can you hear me now?
Yes, Ryan, you're back. Okay, fire away, sir.
Yeah, you're back, Ryan.
We just lost him. All right. I think we'll pull a question. Dale, go ahead with your question. Go ahead and audible it, sir. Go ahead. It's all right. Fire away, Dale. You're good. Fire away. I think you're going to be a good question. Just make it. Come over here real quick. Double time, double time. Thank you, my friend. Quick question. Yes.
So, a company with approximately 45 offices across the country, 1,000 employees, all using SharePoint, OneDrive, the entire Microsoft product stack. Can your company obfuscate all of that traffic?
So the question is, a company using essentially the Microsoft stack, can we obfuscate the traffic? We can obfuscate the traffic from the corporate environment and from the endpoints in the corporate environment to the cloud infrastructure. From that perspective, obviously when you're going to a commercial cloud SaaS solution, that's a known endpoint. That's where the solution is. But we can use the technology to hide where that's coming from. So, for instance, in this example, Microsoft wouldn't know where the starting point was for the traffic. It would just be coming from a random location that constantly changed and rotated over time from that perspective. So, does that answer your question?
Okay. Go ahead. You need to take the mic.
So I'll change that question a little bit. I work for an enterprise company. We have thousands of employees in this state alone, at least 10 to 20,000. How can your company help us?
Well, that's a great question. So, I mean, from an end user perspective, I think that our new Browse product, that again is coming out very very soon, is going to provide a high level of malware protection and be able to dynamically bubble wrap risky sessions without getting in the way of normal web traffic and interaction. So I think that's from an end user perspective. From a kind of corporate back end perspective, there's typically different degrees of threats. So, for instance, you're going to have people who are VIPs or people who travel regularly to risky regions in the world that are under more risk and different types of risk than your employees who are working from their house or from a corporate office. So we can provide layers of anonymity and protection to those folks so that wherever they travel throughout the world, all of their system traffic can go through our network and egress close to home, so that a bad actor can't see that traffic going through. You don't look like you're in China, for instance, those types of things. So we can manage that. From a back office perspective, we do a tremendous amount of work in terms of protecting the crown jewels of the corporation and the company, and providing areas that are difficult to identify as yours, because we're gapping them. I don't like to overuse the word air gap, but we're taking your infrastructure and your network components, taking it away from the direct corporate threads of that network and hiding it behind a layer. And so it makes it difficult for those threat actors to then trace back to where your secure backups are or where your critical IP is and those types of things. So I think there's a lot of ways to work at it from that perspective in terms of trying to add value and security to you.
I think the burning question for all of us is trial licenses. So as we finish up our meeting, and we want to make sure that we end on that point, gentlemen are standing in the back. We're going to get this information out here, but the question would be is, how do we get the trial license? How's the best way to engage?
Yeah, so the folks in the back will be point for that. So we'll take that information and process it. As I mentioned, we We do have a vetting process. It's quick, but we do vet all of our customers to make sure that they're from good, trusted companies and not bad actors. We don't want our tools to be used for evil. And so there's a quick vetting process of a corporation. So we do not allow just individuals, with your Gmail account to sign up for a trial. It has to be through a corporate entity, an identity that we can trace back and verify corporately is a good company. So that's the starting point, and then we can get trial licenses spun up and get that out to you for use.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate our sponsors as always. A round of applause, and then we'll spend the rest of the time to join.